Hey everyone, welcome to a new GearBlocks Dev Diary. As you may know, in the past I've gone back and forth on whether to change the building system in the game to make it more user-friendly. Although many people have gotten used to the current controls, I still think that quite a few, especially new players, find them a bit awkward and off-putting. I really should have dealt with this a long time ago, but I just couldn't think of a design I was happy with, and so to be honest I just kept putting it off. Anyway, lately I've been having another go at prototyping some new ideas to try and address these problems once and for all. The first thing I looked at was how selection works. So if I spawn a new part or a construction, it's now not selected initially by the player. Instead, you can now click on a frozen part to select it, and selection is indicated by this bounding box here. Eventually I want to make selected parts appear semi-transparent, but I think this will do for now just to show what's happening. Before you would toggle selection movement on and off by clicking the left mouse button, but now you have to hold down the button and drag to move a selection around like that. And you'll notice that the selection doesn't rotate with the player now, it just remains aligned in world space, which I think is a bit more intuitive. And you can still translate the selection under the cursor as before, like that. Now when I let go of the button, the selection remains frozen. Before it would have, by default, it would have become unfrozen. So to unfreeze this, currently I have that bound to Control F, and so I can unfreeze these frozen parts like that. Right now I can't select an unfrozen part, I have to freeze it first. But this will change. Eventually I'm going to make it so that you can directly select an unfrozen part. So essentially it'll go through both steps together, it'll freeze and select in one go. With this new selection system, one cool thing you can do is hold down Control and then left click to Multiselect, and so I can select both of these parts together and move them around like that. When it comes to attachment, that's very similar to before. You just align a selected part to a frozen part, in the same kind of way as before. And then right now I'm holding down the mouse button. As soon as I let go, the parts will attach together. Now before, to detach parts, you would hold down the right mouse button, but now I just hold down the left mouse button and drag to either move the part to a different spot and reattach it, or to detach it altogether like that. If I want to move the whole construction together rather than detaching stuff, I can again I can use Control and left click to select both these parts and move everything together. Alternatively, I can highlight one of the parts in a construction and hold down Control A to select all. And it kind of does the same kind of thing. Right now I have duplicating a part on Control D, and again it's not selected by the player initially, it's just positioned and frozen and positioned above the part that it was cloned from. We can attach this one over here. Now the sort of multi-select function is kind of handy because it means I can now, for example, select just these two parts and move them relative to this one here, but I could also just select this part here, for example, and move it like that, and these other two parts stay where they are, which is kind of handy. I've also been working on some ideas to make it easier to transform a selection. In other words, to translate, rotate, or resize it. My thinking is that you would highlight a pivot point on a selected part, and that would be the basis of the transform. So for example, if I highlight the end of this part here and go into rotation mode, I can now rotate around that point. Now right now there's no sort of visual indication of the pivot point. Eventually I want to have a kind of a gizmo with the three rotation axes, X, Y, and Z axes on it, and you can click on each one of those to rotate around each axis independently. And I think it'd also be quite cool to have it so you can left click or hold down the left mouse button on one of the axes and drag to rotate smoothly around that axis, so that you can get, you know, smaller than 90-degree intervals that way. Same kind of thing goes for translation. Go into translation mode. Again, right now I have this on bound to keys to move it around. In fact, it's currently bound to W, A, S, and D, which means I can't move the player around at the moment, which is kind of annoying. So either I would use different keys, but I think similar to rotation, I think it'd be kind of cool to have a visual gizmo that you can just click on the different axes to translate stuff around. The cool thing about this as well is it works while a part is attached to another part. So if I go into rotation mode, I can pivot around that point. And this could be quite useful, I think, if this beam was attached to an axle, you could rotate it around the pivot point on that axle. Yeah, I think that could be quite useful. And again, I can, you know, manipulate multiple parts together if I select them like that. That kind of thing. However, somewhat awkwardly, the game does have, you know, things like the plates, which are kind of half unit height. So there needs to be a way to translate in half steps. So I think probably I'll just have a mode that you can toggle between whole and half steps or something like that for translation. Anyway, yeah, that's kind of the idea. And then lastly, for resizing, right now this works the same way as it always has, but eventually I want to have like handles that you can click and drag to on each end of the part to resize it, because that way, if this part was attached here, for example, I could just drag the end of the part around to resize it and keep this end in place. As you can see, there's still a lot more work to do on all this, but I think things are going in the right direction now. I know changing the building system like this might prove a bit controversial, but I believe if I don't do something to improve usability, the appeal of the game will always be more limited than it needs to be, which would be a real shame. Anyway, let me know what you think, and thanks for watching.